God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program. Thank you so much for watching. I have a funny story really quick for you. So I'm at a brutal intersection of not having timely available Wi-Fi and also not having any data available on my current mobile plan. So there will be no visual aids to go along with the next couple of videos, but you should be able to find what I'm telling you about relatively easily based on my description of events. So, freedom wins? Question mark. The gay wedding cake court case had its verdict handed down by the United States Supreme Court today, and they sided with the baker. Now, the opinion that was handed down and authored by Justice Kennedy is pretty narrow. It's so narrow that I think we could be back in this situation in a short time. It's perhaps not narrow enough that we're going to see another very similar case in the near future, but it's narrow enough that I think we're going to be back here within a few years. It'll have to be years, because it'll have to be a new thing that happens this year or in the future. And this happened all the way back in 2012, so it could be 4 more years before the Supreme Court hears that case. So it could be a while. It could be a while, let's put it that way. First of all, I want to talk about some of the dishonest reporting that's going on with the mainstream media. At the least, CNBC has reported that the Supreme Court narrowly voted on the side of the baker. Now, apparently that means that CNBC thinks that a 77-33 split is narrow. Now, where does 77-33 come from? 77 is 7 divided by 9. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. 7 voted with the baker. That's 77%. 2 voted against the baker. That's 33%. Apparently CNBC thinks that a roughly 50 points or 40 point split is narrow. But hey, I'm just a hillbilly. The Fox News column reporting on this story had a lot more information and presented it as more of the basic fact thing. So just Google search Fox gay wedding cake court case or gay wedding case Supreme Court, and you're going to find this story. So, as I've already said, the court voted 7-2. The language of the decision is that the court voted to set aside the injunctions of the lower courts. Now, I assume that that simply means that the baker, excuse me, is not going to be penalized by the laws that he was being tried under. Now, the court did not overrule or did not rule on the validity of the law that the baker, whose name is Jack Phillips, is being penalized under in Colorado. They didn't vote on that whatsoever. They simply voted that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, I believe is the name of the organization that was handing down these penalties, was in the wrong in the way that they were punishing Jack Phillips. Now, I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure how that would change the vote if the Colorado Civil Liberties Commission, or whatever they're called, had simply ruled in a different manner. Justice Kennedy authored the majority opinion, and one of the comments from the Fox News column was that Kennedy appeared bothered by comments that were highlighted coming from the Colorado Civil Liberties Commission. Again, I'm not sure if that's the name of the organization, but it's pretty close. Kennedy seemed bothered by the fact that this organization, the Organization of Colorado, was intolerant of Jack Phillips's religious beliefs. He's called, in his opinion, he called the statements from the commission hostile to religion. And he wrote that the Colorado Commission didn't apply the law in a way that was neutral towards religion. That's the way that he saw the commission should have been behaving. Now, I don't know if that means that if the commission had behaved in a way that was more neutral towards religion, that would have been, then those violations of Phillips's freedom of religion would have been okay. But the court ruled on that law, saying that the commission's hostility towards religion was not okay, and for that reason they were going to overturn those lower court rulings. Now, I think at this point it's worth saying that technically, the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction in this court case. Technically speaking, the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction over a state's law that governs your First Amendment rights. The First Amendment is not like the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment guarantees that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be abridged, and there is no qualifying statements besides that one. And there's also there's the loose relation to the I forget the word, the militia. We've talked about the militia clause in the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment only guarantees that Congress is not going to abridge your First Amendment rights. The First Amendment says nothing about whether or not the states have any rights. Therefore, via the 10th Amendment, the states do retain the right to abridge your First Amendment rights. Via the 10th Amendment, due to the silence of the First Amendment on the right of the states and the federal government to, via the silence of the First Amendment on the state's jurisdiction over First Amendment rights, the state does retain the right to abridge your First Amendment rights, like freedom of religion and the press and so on and so forth. Now, it's not in the spirit of the First Amendment to do those things, but it is within the letter of the First Amendment that the states should be able to abridge those rights. I'm just speaking technically. I'm not saying that I would agree with a state abridging the right of any to the freedom of religion if they chose to exercise their right. But it is within the letter of the First Amendment for the states to do that. Now, let's talk about some of the reactions that are highlighted in the Fox News column. Quote, civil rights groups have expressed concern over rolling back protections for groups with a history of enduring discrimination. Now, the way that I read that, it says groups that have a history of having discrimination put upon them. I don't think that's saying that the history is of discrimination enduring. I think it would be a convoluted way to read that sentence. So, that being said, the history, these groups that have these protections under current American law is because of historical discrimination, not because of any current discrimination that's going on. Although it could be cited that this case of discrimination is a current example of discrimination. So, I want to ask you a question. Are these protections that allegedly civil rights groups are concerned about rolling back, are these protections necessary? Is it necessary to enshrine in law that these protections must be observed? I would say that in the days of separate but equal, of Jim Crow, right after slavery, when those prejudices were widespread, when it was possible that through no grand conspiracy other than a widespread prejudice against a certain people, when it was possible that could exclude someone from receiving fundamental for life services and goods, that it would have been necessary to enshrine those protections. let's just put some names to it. When it was possible that a black person could not buy food because no one in town would sell food to a black person, it would have been necessary to have protections in place to ensure that he could participate in commerce and not be totally excluded from the marketplace. It's no longer the case that a black man is going to be unable to be excluded from the marketplace that he can't drive to in a day. You know, I wouldn't expect, let's put it this way. If you can, within 30 minutes of your house, find a place that's going to sell you what you're looking for, you're not being discriminated out of the marketplace, my opinion. I grew up in a small town where you had to drive 30 minutes to get a few things, so that's the way that I look at it. Now, privileged people that didn't have to walk more than a block to find what they were looking for might have a different opinion on things. That's my opinion. By the same token, were this gay couple discriminated out of the marketplace in 2012 in a search for a cake to be served at their wedding? The answer is no. In fact, just recently, well, I'm not sure how recently, it might have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. One of the members of this couple wrote an article for the ACLU talking about how they found a cake shortly after they were rejected by Masterpiece. They even found a baker that was sympathetic to their plight of being discriminated against by the Masterpiece cake shop owner. They were not discriminated out of the marketplace. They were only, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word that I'm looking for. It's a word that you hear on voice messages all the time about inconvenience. They weren't even really inconvenienced, except for the fact that they had to leave the first cake shop that they went to and go to a different one. That's all the inconvenience they had to deal with. They were not discriminated out of the marketplace. The second reaction that I want to highlight is the reaction of Justice Ginsburg. According to Justice Ginsburg, the opinions of quote, a few of the members of the commission, that would be the Colorado Commission on Human Rights or whatever it was, that shouldn't abridge the right of these two individuals to demand that a baker bake a cake for them. That's the nuts and bolts of it. Ginsburg, the literal language of it was that the opinion of a few of the members of the commission shouldn't afford a right to a person to discriminate against people. Now, the right to discriminate is something that we could talk about. I think we could do a whole video talking about this right to discriminate. But apparently, guilt by association doesn't apply to the left. Guilt by association is this thing that happens where people can get tarred and feathered over the opinions of people that they happen to appear at a rally with or give a speech with. Guilt by association is a real thing that a lot of people on the right have to deal with a lot. A lot of people on the right have to disavow all the time from people that call themselves right-wing because the left so zealously hunts down guilt by association. Unless it's a few bigots in a Colorado civil rights tribunal, in which case Justice Ginsburg doesn't care about guilt by association. Now, I'm going to talk about why I called these people bigots in a moment. The American Human Rights Commission, or something like that, talked about the narrow scope of this decision. And I would like to ask if the decision were simply reversed, if it was 7-2 in favor of the gay couple, saying not every baker has to bake a cake for the gay couples that come into their house, but this baker does. This baker specifically doesn't have a good reason to deny this couple a custom-baked wedding cake. So he does have to, but we're not saying that every baker in the future will have to. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. What do you think the reaction by the left would be? You know, when the Supreme Court, I heard this story from another YouTuber just as I was finishing up my preparations for this video. When the Supreme Court of the United States of America handed down the ruling that gay marriage was now going to be allowed in all 50 states, independent of state laws and the progress that state legislatures across the country were making towards legalizing gay marriage, Romanian citizens took to the streets and took to Facebook to say how proud they were that gay marriage was now a thing in the United States of America. So how do you think the left would have reacted had the roles been reversed? Had a very narrow scope ruling been applied to this case, but in favor of the gay couple rather than against them? I think they would think this a revolutionary thing, a thing that should be celebrated with all of the Facebook filters, with all of the marches in the streets, and all of this, that, and the other. But of course, this is just speculation on my part. Now, before I go on to my final segment, where I'm going to talk about the precedent that this sets, I want to ask the question, why are no Muslim bakeries wrapped up in this controversy? Why is it there's another case similar to this one where a Christian baker didn't sell a cake. He refused to sell any cake to a gay couple. This baker that we're talking about today, Mr. Phillips, he refused to simply make a custom cake for this couple. He offered to sell them all manner of other cakes. He was not going to make and sell a wedding cake for them. So why have no Muslim bakeries been wrapped up in this controversy? In fact, I think this happened in 2012, and I haven't watched the video, but I think it was Steven Crowder that all the way back at the beginning of this controversy took a hidden camera into some Muslim bakeries to ask if they would bake cakes for gay couples. And I'm going to leave you in suspense. You're going to have to go hunt down that video and see what the results were. But suffice it to say, nobody is suing Muslim bakeries, and Muslim fundamentalists will not sell cakes to gay couples. Muslim fundamentalists are throwing gays off of rooftops in the Middle East. Christian fundamentalists are just not selling cakes to gay couples. They're not doing anything else to them. But Muslim fundamentalists are throwing them off roofs. Now, what is the precedent that this court case sets? I've already said that I think we're going to be back in this situation for a slightly different case in the future, because the precedent is very specific to this case. The court and the opinion authored by Justice Kennedy very specifically targeted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, saying that they handled this case wrong, and that was it. They didn't say that the baker was in the wrong. They didn't say that the gay couple was in the wrong. They only said that the Civil Rights Commission was in the wrong so far as that they were hostile towards religion. So, in the future, I can see a civil rights group that tries very hard to be neutral towards religion and still force a Christian baker or bakery to make a cake for a gay couple, even though the Christian baker may object on religious grounds. And we could see ourselves back at the Supreme Court. We could see a more narrow ruling. We could see a 4-5 split in favor of the gay couple, where Justice Kennedy authors the majority opinion and says, this differs from Masterpiece Cake Shops versus the state of Colorado because the state of blah, blah, blah was neutral towards religion. I think we could very easily see ourselves back in that situation, but I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case, what you think about the precedent that it sets. Could we be back in this situation in a few years' time? Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you all enjoyed. I hope that you'll Leave a like if you did. Hit subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss a single video. Make sure that you check back here every weekday for a new report, because you never know what shenanigans are going on with YouTube and their algorithm. We just heard recently that they will be curating your subscription feed. So if you don't want to miss these videos, you're going to have to check back on the page every day. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope that you'll come back next time. Until then, good night and God bless.